Chapter 4 Broken Minds and Bloody Knives. CJ was relieved when he stepped into the science building to find that all the seats except for one was occupied. The last possible hiccup in the plan was no longer a concern. Mr. Thompson, the nose-blind science teacher, sat at the end of his desk. He wore a grin that almost matched the kids' anticipating summer break. "Thank you for joining us, Mr. Blake," he said. It wasn't cold, so he wasn't angry, just eager to finish the last day of school. "Now that we're all here, I can give you today's assignment." That statement was met with disapproving glares and noises from the classroom's occupants. CJ's voice was among them, but quieter than most. Mr. Thompson either didn't notice or he didn't care. "I know all of you are looking forward to the end of the school year, but I want to remind you that most kids tend to get a little laxed over the summer. You'll probably watch a lot of TV and play outside, maybe some video games, and maybe one of you will even read a book. The point is, you waste time. This is fine at your age, no one expects differently, but I don't believe time is here only to be wasted. There will be a point in your life where you will want nothing more than that squandered time back. In order to keep you from completely wasting the 3 months, I want you to do something. Make a list of 3 things you wish to accomplish. These can be as big or small as you want, but make them realistic and not ridiculous. These can be 3 things you want to do over the break, or maybe 3 things you're committed to not doing. Like homework? CJ asked as he took up the empty seat at the back of the class. Mr. Blake, I believe that would fall into the category of things we don't want on the list. Take it seriously. By next year, I will be curious to see who has completed all the items on their list. This is all we have to do? Another student asked. The teacher nodded. CJ had been expecting some ridiculous 6-page essay due next year. A little list of things he could complete was way better. There were 1,000 options for what he could put on the list. For one, he could say he wanted to build a treehouse, or play in the woods. Maybe he could resolute to have a good 13th birthday in a few days. Or he could say he wanted to get revenge. It was certainly something he wanted to accomplish. With his better judgment, though, he decided to come up with different ideas instead. Number 1, take a trip somewhere. Number 2, have a good birthday. Number 3, make new friends. While all these things were far out of his control, they were all things he wanted to do. He hadn't been anywhere in quite a while, and he really wanted his first teenage birthday to be a blast. And maybe he could make a new friend. Max was the best, most loyal person anyone could ever have, but it'd be nice to have more than one friend to hang out with. There was one thing he wanted most that he didn't dare put on paper. He'd trade in every other thing on the list if he could just get his hallucinations to stop. The letter today proved that reality was slipping away from him, and he doubted the summer would be very enjoyable if he could never tell what was real and what was a product of his fractured mind. "Is everyone finished?" Mr. Thompson asked when the kids seemed to start messing around. No one replied, but as far as CJ could see, no one remained writing. "Perfect! I believe we've completed the only activity I had planned. We could stay in here and play a couple games, or go on the playground." "Playground!" one of the kids shouted. Others echoed the call, and CJ blanched. If they randomly went outside before the end of school, it could ruin his plan. And worse, he could get in serious trouble. He'd been banking on the idea that as soon as the final bell rang, he was no longer under their jurisdiction. All right, we can go to the playground. Just make sure you take everything with you when you go." Max glanced over at CJ, looking just as panicked. CJ wanted to offer an excuse, a justifiable reason that they should stay inside for the next 50 minutes. But there wasn't one. Maybe the only thing CJ should have put on the list was survive summer. He'd be lucky to achieve much else while grounded for the next decade. The kids all got up and started shuffling towards the door. In the midst of the unfolding terrible news, there at least was a silver lining. Johnny was pushing his way between other students, clamoring to be at the front. "At least the right person will get a pink job." Johnny opened the door and stepped out into the sunny day. CJ held his breath as the bully seemed to stumble. The kids were now piling out after him, and CJ followed close behind. He waited. There was no pink explosion, no exploding fireworks. He shoved his way out the door to find that the mechanism had malfunctioned, which explained why there was no pink dye. Then CJ heard the hiss of a fuse. CJ had set the fireworks up away from the building to keep the explosives from catching on the overhanging roof. But as his eyes found the source of the soft hissing, he found that wouldn't be a problem, because the mortar tube had fallen onto its side. CJ watched in horror as the fuse ended its duration, and the rocket was propelled forward. Luckily, the projectile was not pointed at the students who were exiting the building. Unluckily, it was pointed toward the school. Sparks spewed out of the rocket as it flew toward the building about 60 feet until it exploded in a fiery display. A crashing boom erupted across the field, with screams of hysteria following after it. "What's going on out there?" Mr. Thompson yelled as he exited the science building. CJ watched his teacher's expression as he saw the remnants of the fireworks. Sparks showered down onto the field and smoke billowed in the air. Then CJ saw the slightest bit of flame as the dry grass caught fire. At that exact moment, a strong gust of wind kindled the little flame even more and pushed it back in the direction of the children. In an instant, the small spark had grown to the size of a large campfire. "Go! Go!" his science teacher shouted, ushering the children to run toward the school and away from the flames. Most kids followed the orders, but a couple others seemed too petrified to respond. His teacher grabbed a student on the shoulder and beckoned them to start running. Soon, everyone was going, but CJ hung back. The fire wasn't too big yet, and he remembered there being an extinguisher inside. If he could get to it, he could fix this mess. His mess. Mr. Thompson was too preoccupied with the other students to notice as CJ doubled back, but Max caught sight of him and turned tail as well. "Max, get out of here! This isn't your problem!" CJ yelled. His best friend simply shook his head and continued to follow CJ back towards the classroom. "This is your problem, which makes it my problem." Max was loyal to the end, which made him both a great and sometimes annoying companion. CJ decided it would be quicker not to argue. He sprinted back inside the structure and found the extinguisher hanging on the wall. When he came back out, a horrifying and impossible sight greeted him. What had been a large campfire a moment ago had now spread exponentially in his absence, but it hadn't spread out, not naturally anyway. Flames that were at least 12 feet high now raced across the field in an impossible display, creating a wall of fire that separated the science building from the school. CJ watched in disbelief as the fire continued its preposterous course, the flames eating up ground faster than he thought possible. The inferno spewed smoke into the air, creating a shroud that cut off the outside world from view. CJ pulled up short as he realized what lay before him. No matter where he looked, dancing flames declared the same truth to him. They were trapped. And somehow, there was still something else that drew his attention. Almost 100 feet ahead of him, a weird fog seemed to be swirling, almost like some kind of doorway. And then a figure stepped out of the fog, seemingly materializing out of thin air. He was tall and unnaturally pale, as if he'd never seen the sun before. Dark robes contrasted his pale skin, and he was holding a glass bottle no bigger than a soda can. The man was swirling the liquid inside in a motion that reminded CJ of a tornado. Even with the space of 30 yards between them, he felt threatened by the man. When their eyes met, a sneer spread across his lips.
"We meet again, boy. I plan to kill you properly this time,"
he said, his words almost lost to the sound of roaring fire around them. The man's voice was somehow hoarse and deep at the same time. He raised his hand, finger outstretched towards CJ. The boy stood frozen, the spectacle before him conquering his attention. Then something else emerged from the swirling, foggy portal, stepping as if through a doorway. It was around 3 feet tall with gray, sickly skin. Rough scabs covered much of its body, and its beady red eyes started scanning the world around it. It had long arms that drooped almost to its stubby little legs, and it wore an open-chested vest around its slim frame and brown trousers. The pig snout on its head sniffed intently, and the triangular ears that stuck out either side of its face were listening carefully. A moment later, 2 more monstrosities identical to the first joined in the same fashion as their brother. The shock of the impossible sight gripped CJ only for a moment before a realization struck him. "I'm just imagining this," he thought to himself, the notion accompanying a sense of triumph. For a second there, he'd actually considered that anything before him had been real. Sure, this spectacle was quite a bit more potent than even the note incident from earlier today, but that was the only explanation. A weird dude, the creepy creatures, even the fire, it's all fake. It's a hallucination. "What are those things?" Max asked as he stepped out onto the field. "And who's that guy?" CJ's stomach lurched. He cast a sidelong glance at his best friend. You can see this?" Max nodded, his hard mask failing to cover the fear in his eyes. But that couldn't be the case. Everything in view was impossible, from the odd creatures to the man who had stepped out of a cloudy, swirling portal. Except, CJ could smell the smoke in the air invading his lungs. Even at a distance, he could feel the fire's heat. If the impossible ring of fire was real, perhaps all of it was. The first of the small creatures had spotted him, and it seemed to be chattering to the others. They soon took note of him as well. CJ watched cautiously as one of the little freaks produced a slender dagger from a little sheath hanging on its belt. Then the 3 of them charged towards CJ and Max. "Run!" he cried, dragging his friend away from the oncoming threat. Max kept pace beside him as they tried to put more distance between themselves and the little pig-faced monstrosity. But they could only go so far. The ring of fire was probably between 80 and 90 yards in diameter, which surrounded both the science building and the field around it. As they neared the wall of fire, the heat intensified uncomfortably. "We're out of room," Max said, tugging CJ away from the flames. "None of this is real. None of it," CJ said, though his throat felt dry from the heat of the fiery wall. As he spoke, one of the little creatures landed with a thud not 15 paces away. It hit the ground hard, rolling haphazardly before shaking its head clear. CJ looked to where it had been a moment ago, only to find that its two brothers were still closing the distance. Had they thrown this one? "Stay back," Max cautioned, putting a protective arm in front of his smaller friend. CJ wanted to protest, but Max wouldn't let him. The little creature now eyed the boys curiously as it scrambled to its stubby feet and marched menacingly toward them. The thing didn't seem too opposing, but the large knife in its hand made the boy nervous. With sudden speed, the monster lunged toward the duo. Max shoved CJ to one side and dodged to the other. The long arms of the freak held the blade out, mere inches from CJ's chest as it passed. Landing in a somersault, it readied for another attack. Max scrambled to his feet and pulled CJ up with him. They were out of time. The two other creatures were on the other side, boxing them in. CJ brandished the only weapon he had, the fire extinguisher. It wasn't sharp or pointy, but it was heavy. The little freaks continued their unintelligible chatter as they neared the kids. With another burst of speed, one jumped at him. Instinct carried his movements as CJ swung the fire extinguisher at the abomination. The metal cylinder struck the creature with enough force to knock it aside. CJ almost lost his footing in the process, and it was only by Max's support that he stayed upright. His friend reached out and snatched the extinguisher from CJ's grasp as he stepped between the smaller boy and the remaining monsters. Max wrenched the pin out of the handle as he pointed the nozzle at the closest creature. Stay back, you little freak," Max warned as he continually kept himself between CJ and the things trying to kill them. With their brother now knocked aside, the remaining monstrosities were no longer eager to attack. They stopped just shy of where the boys stood beside the fire, chattering. One of the creatures crouched low, compressing itself like a coiling spring before it erupted into motion. Max swiveled the nozzle toward the oncoming threat and squeezed the lever on the extinguisher. Dusty yellow powder exploded out from the nozzle and caught the creature midair. It landed in a heap beside Max, desperately clawing at its eyes and snout. CJ watched as his best friend clubbed the creature on the head with the bottom of the extinguisher. "None of this could be real. None of it! They don't exist!" The sound of commotion from one side alerted CJ that the first creature was back on its feet. It lumbered toward him on all fours, eyes ablaze with murderous intent. CJ glanced to the side only to find that Max was contending with the other monster. He was on his own. CJ stood his ground, waiting for it to reach him. It wasn't real. It couldn't hurt him. All of this is probably a big, bad dream. And if he let it get to him, he could wake up. The little creature rushed forward and jumped. The leap brought it almost to head height, and its arms were outstretched, the knife blade glinting dangerously. Rational thought was overshadowed by instinct as CJ stumbled sideways, doing his best to dodge the attack. The creature missed him by a hair, but the outstretched arm didn't. And neither did the dagger's edge. A burning pain erupted across CJ's chest as the blade cut through his shirt and into his skin. He cried out, shrieking from both surprise and agony as he fell to the ground. When he looked down at his shirt, he found the blue material was turning red with blood. The burning sensation didn't fade. The pain was real. The blood was real. Which meant the knife was too. And so was the wicked little abomination holding it. All of it was real. The little creature wheeled around, facing the now downed boy. CJ lay defenseless on the grass as his blood leaked out from the wound. The monster charged him, dashing on all fours again. It sprung into the air, its blade brandished in a downward grip to skewer him through the heart. CJ watched in disbelief as another small, scabby creature struck his would-be killer midair. The two met with a sickening crunch, the impact sending them both sprawling onto the grass beside the fallen boy. CJ turned his eyes to where the creature had flown from, only to find Max standing there, breathing heavy from exertion. Snarling stole CJ's attention to where the pair of creatures had fallen. The top one lay limp in death. Its brother, on the other hand, now grunted and growled as it tried in vain to scramble out from under the weight of its dead comrade. CJ watched groggily as it clawed at the ground, trying to wrestle free to continue its assault. Max stumbled toward the pair, limping slightly as he drew close to where they lay. Another disgusting crunch met CJ's ears as his best friend struck the struggling creature with the butt of the extinguisher. "That was too close," Max said, fear apparent in his tone as he made his way to where CJ lay limp. Those gray eyes betrayed worry as they examined the wound in his best friend's chest. CJ lacked the strength even to nod. If it hadn't been for the second creature colliding with the first, he'd likely be dead right now. "What do we do?" I don't know," he replied weakly. The pain in his chest made it difficult to speak, and he felt tears falling from his eyes. It seemed to take all the strength he had just to raise his head. A mask of panic seemed to hide Max's usual optimism, and his gaze kept lingering on the cut across CJ's torso. CJ followed his gaze and winced. The pain was still there, though it had gone numb somewhere along the way. But seeing the wound and the blood leaking out of it made his breath catch. He looked away, fighting the fog that seemed to have settled around his mind. CJ's gaze fell on the man next to the shimmering air. He was still shaking his bottle in a circular motion. Maybe he was somehow keeping the fire in place. But that was impossible. It'd be magic. There's no such thing as magic. CJ glanced at the little freaks that lay on the ground a few paces away. There was no such thing as those either, but one of them had still been able to inflict him with a wound. That was when motion near the foggy portal captured his attention. A cloud of black smoke drifted out of the doorway and slowly moved to the middle of the fiery ring. But it didn't flow naturally. The movement looked somehow sentient. It flowed into the dry grass before rising, creating a pillar of black mist taller than a person. The rough shape began to smooth out, becoming more defined. The base split into separate legs, and smaller protrusions on the side of the pillar became arms. The top of the pillar shrank, assuming the shape of a head. By the end of the transformation, a towering knight in smoky, translucent black armor stood with massive sword and shield in hand.